Jill Ovens. With 20 other women, Jill and co-leader Dawn Trenberth started the Women's Rights Party in the week after Kelly J. Keen's visit to New Zealand, the 25th of March, 2023. This was a turning point for those women who were at Albert Park in Auckland to hear Kelly J. Keen speak, and for everyday New Zealanders who were appalled at the violence that day. Jill resigned from the Labor Party that night. She had been an active member, including a period on the ruling Labor Party Council, but she had become increasingly offside over gender ideology capture. Earlier this week, the Independent Police Conduct Authority released their report on policing of public protests in New Zealand. The report puts the failure of policing the Auckland Let Women Speak event down to inadequate risk assessments and inadequate planning and resourcing as a result, and is using this to advocate for a law change to give them powers to control and constrain protests. But the Women's Rights Party says problems went a lot deeper than operational failures and were reflective of a lack of respect of the women who were organising the event and the supporters who were there at Albert Park. The women were simply not taken seriously. Tonight, Jill will be speaking on how giving police more powers to constrain protest is not a solution to police failings. So I would like to hand over to Jill. Jill Ovens, please go ahead.
So kia ora everybody from Aotearoa, New Zealand. So as Janet introduced, we finally got the Independent Police Conduct Authority report, and that was released earlier this week. That was supposed to look into the failure by police officers to protect the safety of women and men in Albert Park at the Let Women Speak event on the 25th of March 2023. But in fact, deals with other protests that have occurred since that are nothing like what happened at Albert Park and don't share the same issues in our view. So the Independent Police Conduct Authority report recommends giving the police extra power to set conditions for protests in new legislation. And as Janet read out, it says that the failure of the policing at the Let Women Speak event was due to inadequate risk assessments and inadequate planning and resourcing as a result. To be fair, the report also criticises the police for failing to protect public safety that day, but you have to go to about page 141 to see that admission has been made. We argue the problems went a lot deeper than the operational failures that they went to great lengths in the report to describe. And they reflected, and it's clear in the documentation of the report, that they had a lack of respect of the women who were organising the event and the supporters who were there at Albert Park. The women were simply not taken seriously. In fact, at one stage, they referred to the police liaison organiser from the Let Women Speak event as being in a flap at a time when women and men were surrounded on the rotunda and getting beaten up and were in fear of their lives. So as I said, the report itself is 156 pages, and it is heavily critical of the way the police handle protests in general, and that's what's been used to argue for draconian recommendations that would give the police more powers. But if you want to read the report about the Let Women Speak event, you have to go to page 77 to an appendix. And so, the admission of failing was to protect public safety was clearly buried at the end of the extensive report that gave much more attention to these minor police failings in other protest settings. It also, and I just want to attribute this to Sasha Jones, who's on the call, who mentioned that it radically understates the willful police failings on the day that put KJK's life and the lives and safety of her supporters at serious risk. A risk that extensive videos that were taken on that day, as well as testimonies of police complaints made by the women in attendance on the day, provide ample evidence. It's clear from the report that the police knew well before the Let Women Speak event in Auckland of a heightened threat to public safety, after organisers alerted them to the violent confrontations that we saw at similar events in Melbourne and Hobart the previous week. No one in New Zealand, including the police, could have missed the well-publicised attempts by Green Party MPs to block KJK from entering New Zealand. In addition, there was widely reported incendiary comments by the then Immigration Minister, Michael Wood, and widely distributed social media posts by Green Party and Labour MPs, including Grant Robertson, who was the New Zealand Deputy Prime Minister at the time. In fact, the Prime Minister at the time, Chris Hipkins, said that if he had been around, he would have been at the protest and supporting the protesters. So the media hype in the lead up to the event was relentless, with accusations of dangerous and incorrect worldviews, neo-Nazism and white supremacy, and all of that was without basis and aimed at inciting hatred against KJK and her supporters. In fact, at one time, KJK was fiddling with her jacket, and this was put out all over the TV news that she was making Nazi symbols to far-right extremists. What a load of rubbish. Anyway, at the time, the Minister of Justice, Kiri Tapu Allen, joined the fray 3 days before the event on the 22nd of March with a call to action, and this is what she put in her social media. Let's do what we do, Aotearoa. Stand up, make some noise, and support our trans whānau by showing up and drowning out any bigotry. The Minister of Justice. The Green Party also put out a call to their members to join in the protest, and this was signed by then MPs Elizabeth Kirikiri Golritz-Garriman, both of them subsequently disgraced and no longer in Parliament, and the current Green MP Ricardo Mendes March. As many as 2,000 protesters turned up, making an incredible noise, pushing over barriers, intimidating and threatening the 150 or so who were there to hear KJK and to have a say. And interestingly, the report points out that while the New Zealand Bill of Rights protects all citizens' rights to assemble and to speak, it doesn't say we have the right to hear speakers. So I'm just going to show you some of the slides, then I'll continue on, that were taken that day. So I need to acknowledge that these are photos from a Radio New Zealand News photo essay. So you can see all their placards, and this is where Kelly J got doused with tomato juice by one of the trans supporters. And here she is live streaming to all of New Zealand, and see how lovely the trans rights people were. And this is where they stormed the rotunda, and you could see in the, oops, there's Kelly J trying to leave. I didn't realise I'd set this up to keep clicking. And that guy in the middle, the very tall one, was one of the ones that you could see in the videos was bashing people up. Now, I don't want to show you that yet. So, yeah, so you could see all the protesters. They made an incredible noise. It was really, really disturbing. And it was very intimidating and threatening. There was only about 150 or so of us that were there to hear Kelly JK and have a say. And so what happened was that the police stood by as women were desperately calling 111, where their cries for help were just brushed aside. And you could see in some of those pictures that some were trapped on the band rotunda as the protesters climbed over the walls, having pushed over the barriers that were supposed to separate the protesters from those of us who had come to hear KJK. Others went up to the police officers who were lounging under the trees at the back of the crowd They were told other police officers were over there pointing to the rotunda. And no, they weren't. I was directly in front of the rotunda and yelling out to the TV crew beside me, "Where's the police? Where's the police?" "Yes," said the reporter, "it's crazy." The calls for help were ignored. A handful of police officers had been deployed to the event, were inside the police van parked on the edge of Albert Park. And 4 other police officers were caught on a guy called Simon Anderson, who had a 360-degree camera on the end of a long pole. And you could see these 4 police officers moving through the crowd, eyes ahead, not looking at the rotunda where all hell had broken loose, heading for the safety of their police van on the edge of the action. I didn't see them, most of us didn't. Simon's independent video clearly shows that KJK's security and the marshals saved her life that day, while the police sat in their van doing nothing, with the women literally begging them for help. In an interview on the platform, Linda, the Let Women Speak police liaison person and chief marshal, describes how she made her way over to the police van and knocked on their window. She was desperate for police to come and help. The police officer in charge told her they don't have a duty to protect the women. The protesters have a right to protest. That's what she was told. And that's a lie. Police do have a duty to protect public safety. Disorderly behaviour is a crime in New Zealand. It is a crime to assault someone, as we can see clearly in Simon's video. We see a man with a leather and metal protector on his forearm pushing and shoving Linda, who was wearing a pink marshal's vest. You see him literally throwing her to the ground. He was never charged. All the while, Tanya was knocked to the ground, kicked and trampled on, and as can also be seen in these videos, objects were being thrown at KJK. Her security officers and supporters, as they tried to get away from the baying crowd, were just being they were trying to push them down onto the ground so that they could lay into them. And you can see a large guy, that was the guy that I showed you at the end in drag, shoving KJK supporters aside as he tried to get to KJK. And he wasn't the only one. KJK says they were out to kill her. I think they probably were. She won't come back to New Zealand as she thinks we're all crazy. And it was only after that when the police officers finally act. Not till KJK and her security got to the edge of the park. So what they suggest in the report, the police said that they had responded by assisting private security guards and facilitating the main speaker to leave and others to leave if they feel unsafe. And that is nothing short of a lie. If we can get the video going at the end of this, you could see that. So in the aftermath of the release of the police conduct report, Women's Rights Party members were reporting on Facebook that they've completely lost trust in our police. Being at Albert Park and experiencing firsthand the lack of response by the police has left many of us wounded, one said. The report states that the police unit, intelligence unit, I should say, in Wellington, picked up on what was happening in Melbourne the week before the Auckland event. They passed the information on to the Auckland police, but nothing was done to increase police resources on the day. There were only a handful of police there at Albert Park. So the report criticises the operation commander and the forward commander who were in charge for not properly responding to unfolding events by deploying additional staff to protect the Let Women Speak supporters. And that was deliberate in our view. They knew. And when push came to shove, quite literally, they were nowhere to be seen. They were still in their van. When we arrived, sometime before Kelly J. Keane arrived, we could see the barriers that Let Women Speak organisers had set up. And several metres inside, there was another rope fence. And we assumed that that was where the police were going to form a line to separate the protesters who were already moving towards where we were in the fenced-off area. But the police were nowhere to be seen. And in fact, it turns out they never intended to patrol that area, the no man's land, as it was called. And so eventually the protesters were getting more and more whipped up. Eventually the protesters burst through the barriers in a very aggressive and intimidating manner, resulting in the violent assault of a 71-year-old woman. That guy was charged and basically let off. A police officer told the Independence Conduct Authority he hadn't expected the rainbow community to be so aggressive. It's clear there was bias on the part of the police, not helped by the training they've been receiving that portrays gender critical views as hate speech and the trans community as victims. In fact, in their training, as revealed by the Free Speech Union, police were shown pictures of women holding up placards saying there are only two genders, supposed to be examples of hate speech. As one of our members pointed out, that's so stupid. We know that gender identitarians think there's about 100 genders. And what we also know is there's only two sexes, which is hardly hate speech. And so the report identifies that police suffer from a lack of legislative guidance, and that's why they want to have more power to facilitate protests and enforce reasonable limits on protests. And that's simply not true. The police officer who told Linda that the trials have a right to protest was incorrect. We have a right under our Bill of Rights Act to peaceful protest. It is against the law in New Zealand to incite violence, lawlessness or disorder. The presence of leading Labour and Greens MPs encouraging their supporters in amongst the protesters, the sight of protest organiser Chanel Lal clamouring up on the rotunda and shouting through his megaphone, he was subsequently declared Young New Zealander of the Year, and the obvious presence of provocateurs among the protesters should have been a wake-up call, a red light for police on the ground to call in more reinforcements, which they did not. The report says that the City Council notification and approval processes are ineffective. It recommends new legislation around notification and planning of protests. But notification was not the problem. The report documents extensive notification, liaison and planning with both the Auckland City Council and the police by the event organisers from 17th of February, and with increasing urgency to organisers from the 20th of March after we saw what happened in Melbourne and Hobart. But who has to do the notification? The Let Women Speak organisers did notify the police, as we can see in the IPCA report, and as the accounts of the event organisers attest. So we don't need additional laws to extend the police powers. What we need is for the police to fix their internal systems, to communicate with each other and to do their job. Did the protest organisers notify the City Council or the police of their intention to disrupt the Let Women Speak event? We know that police also liaise with the protest organisers on the day and were given assurances they would be noisy, but the protest would be otherwise peaceful. If we're being charitable and not suggesting that the protest organisers were being disingenuous, we could say that the protest organisers were clearly unable to control their people. And that is actually, you could see that in Simon's video. The report found that the operation commander and the forward commander on the day did not properly respond to unfolding events by deploying additional staff, and further reveals that the operation commander wasn't even attending the planning meetings in the lead up to the event and gave the wrong instruction to do a low profile police presence. This was blindly followed no matter how desperate and urgent the situation became. The police also found that the police response after protesters surrounded the rotunda, well, they didn't just surround it, they climbed onto it and tried to push the Let Women Speak banner that was on a big fence, tried to push it over at great risk to the people in front of it. And so, as WDI New Zealand pointed out, Janet, in her statement, that despite the criticism which vindicates the Let Women Speak supporters who complained to the IPCA about police response, media attention has been focusing on IPCA calls for a law change and not on the shockingly inadequate response at Albert Park. What the report doesn't reveal was what was really lay behind the failure to protect the mostly women supporters. Why did the Auckland Police ignore their own police intelligence unit, the event organisers' growing concerns and the desperate 111 calls on the day, including calls from people watching the live stream from all over the country? Did police take their cue from the politicians? Or was there a deliberate decision from on high, either at the level of the police commissioner or the then Minister of Police, Ginny Anderson? Is police diversity training reinforcing bias against women who want to defend their rights? Or do we have a police force dominated by men who are naturally misogynist? How independent was the IPCA report? Was the Albert Park analysis deliberately buried in an appendix to hide the real motivation of the report, which is to extend police powers? These are questions that are being raised by Women's Rights Party members and others. Finally, where is the apology to the women and men who were at Albert Park, who are still traumatised by our experience, and those from the wider New Zealand community who continue to suffer from the chilling effect of knowing we cannot rely on the police to protect us? So I did just want to show you, because there is an addendum to this IPCA report this week. So hopefully it'll just show this poster long enough for you to see. So just tomorrow, there is going to be a rally against Destiny Church. And we have and it's responding to activities last week by the outwardly homophobic Destiny Church. In an interview where a reporter asks Chloe Swarbrick, who's the Green Party co-leader, about the poster for tomorrow's event, featuring, as you can see, a muscly male slamming a sledgehammer with such force that rocks fly off. Just over 3 minutes into the interview with Chloe, she laughs off suggestions that using the term "these queers bash back," which you could see on that poster, has violent connotations. She says, no, it doesn't. It's talking about we're going to have a little dance. And yet at the start of the interview, Chloe says it's up to all of society to stamp out hateful rhetoric that could so easily lead to real world violence. What a hypocrite. I don't know about Australia, but in New Zealand, women and children living in violent homes often use the term "getting the bash" to describe vicious assaults on them. Who can forget the scene where Jake threw Beth across the room in front of his mates who stood by and so intimidated by Jake in the movie Once Were Warriors? Unfortunately, the reality is that violence, getting the bash, occurs into too many New Zealand homes. I will not be attending tomorrow's rally, and I've advised our members to stay well away. It's clear from the promotional material that the organisers expect Destiny Church to front up, and there will be a stoush, and the Greens will be the victims, and they'll be the martyrs. That's how the media will portray it. As one of our members said last night, our issue as gender-critical women is not with the LGB community, but with the polarising tactics of both the Destiny Church and, as you can see, the Greens, that distracts us from the real issues faced by women and children in our society, including women and girls in the lesbian community. Another member has pointed out that there will be many older gay men who will be very unhappy with the words queer and bash appearing together. Queer bashing was a very dark part of their history, which is why many refer to themselves as gay and never as queer. Someone has realised using the term bash back is not a good look. And the words "these queers bash back" has since been removed from versions now circulating on social media. And I'll just leave it at that, because you'll probably see tomorrow what happened if Destiny Church turns up to Albert Park in the rotunda where the initial offence occurred.
Thank you, Jill. That was chilling, but a really powerful presentation. Thank you so much.